samsardava naravida loka shinhaya karunya ganaganatam Raptasya kalyana gunanabhasya Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Mahaprabhu Kirtana Nitra Gita Parichamajan Manasura Sena Romanchakampa Srutaranga Bhajo Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Shivigrahara Dhanaditranana Shingaratan Mandira Marjanado Yuktasya Bhaktam Shtani Injatopi Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Chaturvidha Shri Bhagava Prasada Svavana Triptan Hari Bhakta Sangan Kritvaiva Triptim Bhajata Saraiva Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Shri Radhika Madhava Yorapara Madhuya Lila Guna Rupanam Nam Praktikshana Swadana Lolopasha Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Nikunjayono Rati Keli Sejai Yaya Libir Yuktira Peksaniya Tatrati Daksharati Valabhasha Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Sakshadarit Veda Samasta Sastra Ukta Sata Bhavyata Eva Sadvi Kintu Prabhoya Priya Eva Tasha Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Yasha Prasadat Bhagava Prasado Yasha Prasada Nakati Katopi Yayansturvam Sasya Yasastri Sanjam Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam. Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam. Vande Guru Shri Charanarvindam. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharine Devasesha Sunyavadi Paschatyade Satarine. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Jai, 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 Jai,
Namaste Narasimhaya. Pralada Lada Daine.
Pralada
Hiranyakashipu Vakshaha.
Hiranyakasipu Vaksha
Shilatankanakalae.
Jaya Silatankanakalaye
To Nashima Bharato Nashimo.
Nisinga Parato Nisinga
Yeto Yeto Yamitato Nashinga.
Jaya Datta Datta Damitato Nisinga
Bahir Nashimo Hridaye Nashimo.
Bhayir Nisinga Hridaye Nisinga
Nashim Mamadim Sharanam Prapade.
Narasimha Madim Sharanam Prapade
Tavakara Kamalavade Naka Avuta Shringa Dalita Hiranyakashipu Tanubringa Keshavalita Rahari Rupa Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare.
Bhavakara Kamala Varenaka Abhuta Singha Dalita Hiranyakasipu Tanabhinga Kesavadita Harirupa Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Jaya Jagadisha
Keshavadrita Narahari Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare Jai Jagadisha Hare.
Jaya Krishna Radhika Narahari Rupa Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare
Jayo Narsingadev, Jayo Narsingadev, Jayo Narsingadev, Jayo Narsingadev.
Jaya Nisingare Jaya Nisingare Jaya Nisingare Jaya Nisingare
Jayo Prahlad Maharaj, Jayo Prahlad Maharaj, Prahlad Maharaj, Jayo Prahlad Maharaj.
Jaya Prahlad Maharaj Jaya Prahlad Maharaj Prahlad Maharaj Jaya Prahlad Maharaj
Jaya Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada.
Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada
Jaya Jaya Gurudev, 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev.
Jai Jai Gurudev, 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 Jai Jai Gurudev. Jai Shri Shri Bhakti Para Sarvignaashana Kanishingare Bhagavan Ki Jai. Jai Bhakta Shrestha Prahlad Maharaj Ki Jai. Nitai Gaurari Pramanande. Shri Vrindai Tulasi Debai Priyayai Kesava Satya Vishnu Bhakti Prade Devi Satavatai Namo Namaha. Vrindayai Tulasi Debai Priyayai Kesava Satya Vishnu Bhakti Prade Devi Satavatai Namo Namaha. Vrindai Tulasi Devai Priyayai Kesava Satya Vishnu Bhakti Prade Devi Satavatai Namo Namaha. Srimati Tulasi Maharani Vrinda Devi Ki Jai. Namo Namo Tulasi Krishna Priyasi. Namo Namo Tulasi Krishna Priyasi. Tulasi Krishna Priyasi. Namo Namo Radha Krishna Seva Pava Eya Vilasi. Radha Krishna Seva Pava Eyo Vilasi. Namo Namo Jetomara Sharanala Taravancha Purna. Kripa Kori Karatare Vrindavanavasi. Tumi Kripa Kori Karatare Vrindavanavasi. Moraya Vila Vilasa Kunje Diyavao. Nayane Riboshada Jugala Ruparasi. Namo Namo Nivedana Nadhara Sakirayano Gatakara Sevaya de Kara de Kara Nijadase Dina Krishna Dasakoi Enamorao Shri Radha Govinda Prema Sarai Navasi Shri Radha Govinda Prema Sarai Navasi Kani sa papani Rama hatari kani sa Tani tani pranasanti Pradakti na pari pari Jani kani sa papane brahmatari kani sa Tani tani pranasanti pradakshina pade pade Jani kani sa papane brahmatari kani sa Tani tani pranasanti pradakshina pade pade Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Tulsi Maharani, Vrinda Devi, Jaya Tulsi Maharani, Jaya Vrinda Devi. Nitai Gaura Haribo, 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 Nitai Gaura Haribo. Shri Vrindai Tulasi Devai Priyai Kesava Satya Vishnu Bhakti Prade Devi Satavatai Namo Namaha. Vrindai Tulasi Devai Priyai Kesava Satya Vishnu Bhakti Prade Devi Satavatai Namo Namaha. Vrindai Tulasi Devai Priyai Kesava Satya Vishnu Bhakti Prade Devi Satavatai Namo Namaha. Shrimati Tulasi Maharani Vrinda Devi Ki Jai. O Tulasi, beloved Krishna, I bow before you again and again. My desire to obtain the service of Shri Radha and Krishna, whoever takes shelter of you as wishes fulfilled, bestow your mercy upon him, you make him resident of Vrindavana. My desire is that you also give me a residence in pleasure groves of Shri Vrindavan Dham. Thus within my vision, I would always behold the beautiful pastimes of Radha and Krishna. I beg you to make me a follower with damsels of virtue. Please give me the privilege of devotional service and make me your own maid servant. This very fallen and lowly servant Krishna prays. May I always swim in love with Shri Radha. Shri Mati Tulasi Maharani Vrinda Devi Ki Jai. Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu Shri Kristakam Ki Jai. Chaitodapanam Ajanam Pavamada Vagni Nirvapanam Shri Akari Vachandika Vitaranam Vidya Vadhu Jivanam Anandam Buddhi Vardhanam Padipadam Purnam Kaswadanam Savatmasnam Param Param Jai Shri Krishna Sankirtanam Nam Nam Akari Vaudha Yasava Shakti Tatsatukanyamta Shmanena Kala Ikadushi Kavapitaya Bhavan Mamati Yudhaiva Midisha Yajanina Nuraga Dinarapi Sunichena Sarorapi Saishnana Amani Namana Dina Kitaniya Sadari Nathanam Najanam Sundari Kavitam Vajakarishakame Mama Janmani Janmanishwari Uta Bhakti Rahoi Tuki Koi Ainanda Tanuja Kinkara Paritamam Vishnu Bhavam Buddha Vipaya Krishna Sankirtana, which cleanses the heart of all the dust like milking years, and extinguishes the fire of conditioned life of the people birth and death. This Sankirtana is the starts to put it tests the nectar, always anxious. Oh my Lord, your holy name alone can render all benediction to living beings. And thus you have hundreds and millions of names like Krishna and Govinda. In these transcendental names, you have invested all your transcendental energies. There's not even hard and fast rule for chanting these names. Oh my Lord, out of kindness, we enable us to easily approach you by your holy names. But I'm so unfortunate but I have no attraction for them. Once you chant the holy name of the Lord in a humble state of mind, think of oneself the Lord on the throne of street, one should be more time than a tree, devoid of all sense of false prestige, and should be ready to offer all respect to others. In such state of mind, one can chant the name of the Lord constantly. O Almighty Lord, I have no desire to accumulate wealth, nor do I desire beautiful women, nor do I want any number of followers. Only one your cause of devotion service, God I pray. Oh, Son of Maharajnanda Krishna, I am your eternal servitor.
Yet somehow or other fall into the ocean of birth.
Please, taking out of this ocean of death,
I place me in the Arabs of
the
religion.
Lord is king.
O my Lord,
And will my eyes be decorated with the tears of love, flowing constantly in your chanting holy name? Or will my voice choke out, and will the hairs of my body stand on end with every station in the name? Oh, forgive me, delaying yourself fresh. I'm considering moments to be like 12 years or more. Tears are flowing from eyes like torrents of rain, and I feel almost vacant in the world in your absence. I don't know one but Krishna as my Lord. He shall remain so, even if his hundreds may wrap you in his own breast, or make me broken hearted by not being present before me. He is completely free to do anything and everything. But he's always my worshipful Lord, unconditional. The action offenses in matter of chanting the holy name of the Lord that should be avoided, they are as follows. One,
to blaspheme the devotees who dedicate their lives to proclaiming the holy names of the Lord. Consider names of demigods like Lord Shiva, Lord Brahma, Lord Vishnu, to disobey the orders of the spiritual master, to blaspheme the Vedic literature or literature in pursuant to the Vedic version. Consider the glories of chanting Hare Krishna as imagination, to give some interpretation on the holy name of the Lord. 7. To commit sinful activities on the strength of chanting the holy name of the Lord. To consider the chanting of Hare Krishna as one of the auspicious, ritualistic activities which are offered in the Vedas as fruit of activities or karma kanda. To instruct the faithless person about the glories of the holy name. To not have complete faith in the chanting of holy names and maintain material attachments even after understanding so many instructions in this matter. It is also an offense to be inattentive while chanting. Every devotee claims to be a Vaishnava must carefully guard against these 10 offenses in order to quickly achieve the desired success, Krishna Prema. Now let us offer our most humble obeisances unto all the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. They are just like desire trees that can fulfill the desires of everyone, and they are full of compassion for the fallen conditioned souls. Vanchakalpatarabhyascha kripasindubhyevacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha Vaishnava Thakur ki jai. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutali Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swamini Tinamani Namaste Saraswati Deve Guruvani Pracharini Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paskatya Satani Shrimad Bhagavatam Grantaraj Ki Jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Janmadyasya Yato Nivayadi Taratas Charteso Vikya Swarat Tene Brahma Hridaya Adikvavaye Muyantiyat Surayaha Tejo Vari Madam Yata Vinimayo Yatrati Sargomesha Damna Svena Sada Nirasta Kuhakam Satyam Parandi Mahi. O my Lord, Shri Krishna, son of Vasudeva, O all-pervading personality of Godhead, I offer my respectful obeisances unto you. I meditate upon Lord Shri Krishna because he is the absolute truth and the primeval cause of all causes, of the creation, sustenance, and destruction of manifested universes. He is directly and indirectly conscious of all manifestations. And he is independent because there is no other cause beyond him. It is he only who first imparted the Vedic knowledge unto the heart of Brahmaji, the original living being. By him, even the great sages and demigods are placed into illusion. As one is bewildered by the illusory representations of water seen on fire or land seen on water, only because of him do the material universes, temporarily manifested by the reactions of the three modes of nature, appear factual although they are unreal. I therefore meditate upon him, Lord Shri Krishna, who is eternally existent in the transcendental abode, which is forever free from the illusory representations of the material world. I meditate upon him, for he is the absolute truth. Dharma projita kaitravocha paramo nirmatsanam satam vedyam vastavamatra vastu shivadam tapatrayom mulivam Srimad Bhagavate Mahamani Krite Kim Vapurer Ishwaraha Sadyo Hridi Avurudyatetra Kriti Bihi Sususubhistakshana. Completely rejecting all religious activities which are materially motivated, this Bhagavata Purana propounds the highest truth, which is understandable by those devotees who are fully pure in heart. The highest truth is reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all. Such truth uproots the threefold miseries. This beautiful Bhagavatam, compiled by the great sage Vyasadeva in his maturity, is sufficient in itself for God realization. What is the need of any other scripture? As soon as one attentively and submissively hears the message of Bhagavatam, by this culture of knowledge, the Supreme Lord is established within his heart. Nigama kalpataror galitam phalam sukumakad amrita dravya samyutam pibata bhagavatam rasamalayam muhur ahoraska bhuvi bhavakaha. O expert and thoughtful man, relish Srimad Bhagavatam, the mature fruit of the desired tree of Vedic literatures. It emanated from the lips of Sri Sukadeva Goswami. Therefore, this fruit has become even more tasteful. Although its nectarian juice was already relishable for all, including liberated souls. Shinvatam Swakata Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtana Hridayam Takstohi Badrani Vidunoti Suhitsatam. To hear about Krishna from Vedic literatures, or to hear from him directly through the Bhagavad Gita, is itself righteous activity. And for one who hears about Krishna, Lord Krishna, who is dwelling in everyone's heart, acts as a best wishing friend and purifies the devotee who constantly engages in hearing of him. Nastapresu abhadresu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavate tomasloke bhaktir bhavati naistaki. In this way, a devotee naturally develops his dormant transcendental knowledge. As he hears more about Krishna from the Bhagavatam and from the devotees, he becomes fixed in the devotional service of the Lord. Tadarajastamo bhava kamalobhadayaschaye cheta etairanavedam stitvam sattve prasidati. By development of devotional service, one becomes freed from the modes of passion and ignorance, and thus material lust and avarice are diminished. Evam prasana manaso bhagavat bhakti yogataha bhagavat tattva vijnanam mukta sangasya jayate. When these impurities are wiped away, the candidate remains steady in his position of pure goodness, becomes enlivened by devotional service, and understands the science of God perfectly. Vidyate hridaya grantis chidyante sarvasamsaya shiyante jasya karmani drista evat manishware. Thus Bhakti Yoga severs the hard knot of material affection and enables one to come at once to the stage of a samsayam samagram, understanding of the Supreme Absolute Truth, Personality of Godhead. Therefore, only by hearing from Krishna or from his devotee in Krishna consciousness can one understand the science of Krishna. Shri Shri Guru Vastika prayers, Ki Jai. The spiritual master is receiving benediction from the ocean of mercy, just as a cloud pours water on a forest fire to extinguish it. So the spiritual master delivers the material afflicted world by extinguishing the blazing fire of material existence. From our respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet, as such a spiritual master is an ocean of auspicious qualities. Chanting the holy name, dancing in ecstasy, singing and playing musical instruments. The spiritual master is always gladdened by the Sankirtan movement of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, because he is relishing the mellows of pure devotion within his mind. Sometimes his hair stands on end. He feels quivering in his body, and tears flow from his eyes like waves. I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is always engaged in the temple worship of Shri Sri Radha and Krishna. He also engages his disciples in such worship. They dress the deities in beautiful clothes and ornaments, clean their temple, and perform other similar worship of the Lord. I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is always offering Krishna 4 kinds of delicious food. Analyzes that which is licked, chewed, drunk, and sucked. When the spiritual master sees that the devotees are satisfied by eating Bhagavad Prasada, he is satisfied. I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is always eager to hear and chant about the unlimited conjugal pastimes of Radhika and Madhava, and their qualities, names, and forms. The spiritual master aspires to relish these at every moment. I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is very dear because he is expert at assisting the gopis who at different times make different tasteful arrangements for the perfection of Radha and Krishna's conjugal loving affairs within the groves of Vrindavana. I offer my most humble obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master. The spiritual master is to be honored as much as the Supreme Lord because he is the most confidential servitor of the Lord. This is acknowledged in all revealed scriptures and followed by all authorities. Therefore, I offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of such a spiritual master who is a bona fide representative of Sri Hare Krishna. By the mercy of Krishna, one receives the benediction. By the mercy of the spiritual master, one receives the benediction of Krishna. Without the grace of the spiritual master, one cannot make any advancement. Therefore, I should always remember and praise the spiritual master. At least 3 times a day, I should offer my respectful obeisance unto the lotus feet of my spiritual master. Shri Brahma Samhita Ki Jai, Ishvara Parama Krishna Sachitananda Vigraha Anadiraja Govinda Sarvakarana Karanam. Chintamani Prakata Satma Sukalpa Vriksha Lakshmi Sahasra Sata Sambrahma Sevimanam. Yeah. Palyantam. Lakshmi Sahasrasata Sambrahma Sevyamanam Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Venum Kunantam Aravinda Dalayataksham Barhabhatam Samasitam Buddha Sundarangam Kandarpakoti Kamaniya Visesha Sobham Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Alola Chandra Kala Sadvanamalya Vamsi Ratnam Gadam Pranay Keli Kalabilasam Shyamam Chibanga Lalitani Taprakasam Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Angani Yasya Sakalendriya Vrittimanti Pasyanti Panti Kalyanti Chiranjaganti Ananda Chinmaya Sadujvala Vigrahasya Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Advaitam Achyutam Anadim Ananta Rupam Adyam Purana Purusham Navayovanam Cha Vede Sadurlabham Adurlabham Atma Bhakto Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Pantastu Koti Satavatsada Sampragamyo Vayoratapi Manasomuni Pungamanam Sopyasti Yat Prapadasimya Vichintya Tattve Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Ekopya Sora Chayitam Jagadanda Kotim Yaschaktirasti Jagadanda Chaya Yadanta Andantarasta Paramanu Chayantarastam Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Yat Bhava Bhavita Diyo Manajastataiva Samprapya Rupa Mahimai Sanayana Pusaha Suktaryameva Nigamas Patitaistuvanti Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Ananda Chinmaya Sadujvala Vigrahasya Ananda Chinmaya Rasa Pratibhavitabhis Tabir Yeva Nijarupa Taya Kalabi Goloka Eva Nivasata Kilatma Bhuto Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Premanjana Charita Bhakti Vilochanena Santak Sadeva Hidayesu Vilokayanti Yam Sham Sundaram Achintya Gunaswarupam Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Ramadi Murti Sukalani Yamenatistan Nana Avatara Makarod Bhuvane Sukintu Krishna Swayam Samabhavat Paramam Spumam Yo Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Paramaha Yasya Prabha Prabhavato Jagadanda Koti Kotisru Seshu Vasudadi Vibhuti Binam Tad Brahma Niskalam Anantam Asesha Bhutam Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Maya Hiyasya Jagadanda Satani Sute Dragunya Tad Vishaya Veda Vitayamanam Sattva Volambi Parasatvam Visuddha Sattvam Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Ananda Chinmaya Rasat Mataya Manasu Ya Praninam Pratifalam Smaratam Upetya Lilaya Tena Bhuvanani Jaya Yajasram Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Goloka Namni Nijadamni Tale Chatasya Devi Mahesa Haridama Sute Sutesu Te Prabhava Nichaya Vitaschayena Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Srishti Stati Pralayasada Vasaktireka Chayeva Yasya Bhuvanani Vibharti Durga Ichanurupam Apiyasya Chachestatesa Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami Shiram Yata Dadi Vikara Visesa Yoga Sanjayate Nahitata Pritakasti Hetu Yasambhutam Apitata Samapaitikar Yad Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami. Deeparchadeva Hita Santanam Abhyupetya. Deepayate Vivita Hetu Samana Dharma. Yastadjageva Hicha Vishnu Taya Vibhati. Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami. Yakarna Narna Vajale Bhajatisma Yoga. Nidram Mananta Jagadanda Saroma Kupaha. Adhara Shaktim Avalambya Param Swamurtim. Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami. Yasyaika Nishvasitakala Matavalambya. Jivanti Loma Vilaja Jagadanda Nataha. Vishnur Mahansahi Yasya Kala Vishesho. Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami. Basman Yatasma Sakalesu Nijesu Tejaha. Sriyam Kiyat Prakatiyat Apitadvadatra. Brahmaya Esa Jagadanda Vidana Karta. Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami. Yat Pada Palava Yugam Vinidaya Kumbha. Tvandve Pranama Samayesus Ganadi Rajaha. Vignam Vihantam Alamasya Jagatrayasya. Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami. Agnir Mahiga Ganamambu Marudisascha. Kalastatatma Manasitti Jagatrayani. Yasmad Bhavanti Vibhavanti Vishanti Yamcha. Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami. Yaschak Suresa Savita Sakalagrahanam. Raja Samasta Suramurti Rasesa Tejaha. Yasyagya Brahmati Sambrita Kala Chakra. Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami. Dharmo Tapapa Nijaya Sutayastapamsi. Madikita. Brahma Dikita Patakavatyascha Jivaha. Yadata Matra Vibhava Prakata Prabhava. Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami. Yes Twindra Gopa Matavendra Mahosva Karma. Bandhanu Rupa Falabhajana Matanoti. Karmani Nidahati Kintu Bhakti Bhajan. Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami. Yam Krodha Kama Sahaja Pranayadi Bitti. Vatsalya Moha Guru Gaura Vasevya Bhavahai. Sanchintya Tasya Sadvisim Tanamapurete. Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami. Shriya Kanta Kanta Parama Purusha Kalpataravo. Druma Bhumis Chintamani Ganamayi Toyam Amritam. Kata Ganam Natyam Gamanam Apivamsi Priyasaki. Chid Alantam Jyoti Param Apitad Aswadyam Apicha. Sayacha Shiradi Bihi Shravati Surabi Vyascha Sumahan. Nime Sardakyo Varvajati Nahiyatrapi Samaya. Bhaje Sveta Dvipam Tamaham Iha Golakam Itiyam. Vitantaste Santakshiti Viralachara Katipaye. Ishopanishad Om Purnam Ada Purnamidam Purnat Purnam Udachate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Visishyate. Ishchivaishamidam Sarvam Jatkinja Jagatyam Jagatina Taktena Punjitaha Magritaha Kishasvidanam. Kurvani Vaha Karmani Jijiva Chekchatam Samaha Evam Twayi Nanyate Tusti Nakarma Kripyate Nare. Asurya Namate Loka Andena Tamasavritaha Tamste Pritya Bigachanti ye ke chatma hano janaha. Anijadika manaso javiyo nena devam apravam pravam asat tad davato nyana teti tastat tasmin apumata visvadadati. Tad ejati tan ejati tad dure tad pantike tad antarasya sarvasya tadu sarvasya sarvayataha. Tadu sarvasya sarvayataha. Yasmin karmani bhutani atmani evanupasyati sarvabhutesu chatmanam tato na vijagupsate. Yasmin sarvani bhutani atmeva vijanataha tatra ko mahaka suka ekatmam anupasyataha. Sa prayagachchukamakayam avranam asnaviram apapavidam kavir manisi paribu swayambhu yatatat yutorutan vyadadach chasvatipyaha samabhyaha. Andam tamaha pravisanti vidyam upasate tato bhuyavate tamo yayu vidyayam rataha. Anyade bhur vidyaya anyada hura vidyaya iti susrumadhiranam yenastad vichaksire. Vidyam cha yasyastad vedobhayam saha avidyaya militim pritva vidyayam ritamasnute. Anyad andam tamaha pravisyanti ye sambhutim upasyate tato bhuyavate tamo yayu sambhutam rataha. Anyade bhur sambhavad anyadahur sambhavad iti susrumadhiranam yenaschaj vichachakshire. Sambhutim cha vinasam cha yastad vedobhayam saha vinasena militam tirva sambhutam ritamasnute. Hiranmayana patrina satyasya pitam mukam tatpam pusam apavrinu satyadharma yadristaye. Usane karseyamasurya prajapatya vyuharasmin samahatejo yate rupam kalyanatadmam tate pasyami yo savaso purushaha sohamasmi. Vayuranilam amritam atedam basmantam sariram om krato smara kritam smara krato smara kritam smara. Agnenaya supatara yasman visvani deva vayunani vidvan yo dajmaz jurana meno puyastam te nama uktim vinama om tatsat. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 7, Text 9. Vena yad venam utpata katam dvijavaksya vrajra. Nispulsta porusha bhagam niraya patatam. Tadvartito jagati putrapadam shalebe. Dugda vasuni vasuda sakalani yena. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Maharaj Vena went astray from the path of righteousness, and the Brahmanas chastised him by the thunderbolt curse. By this, King Vena was burnt with his good deeds and opulence, and was en route to hell. The Lord, by his causeless mercy, descended as his son by the name Prithu, delivered the condemned King Vena from hell, and exploited the earth by drawing all kinds of crops as produce. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. According to the system of Varnashram Dharma, the pious and learned Brahmanas were the natural guardians of society. The Brahmanas, by their learned labor of love, would instruct the administrator kings how to rule the country in complete righteousness, and thus the process would go on as a perfect welfare state. The kings or the Kshatriya administrators would always consult the council of learned Brahmanas. They were never autocratic monarchs. The scriptures, like the Manusamitra and other authorized books of the great sages, were guiding principles for ruling the subjects, and there was no need for less intelligent persons to manufacture a code of law in the name of democracy. The less intelligent mass of people have very little knowledge of their own welfare, as a child has very little knowledge of its future well-being. The experienced father guides the innocent child towards the path of progress, and the childlike mass of people needs similar guidance. The standard welfare codes are already there in the Manusamhita and other Vedic literatures. The learned Brahmanas would advise the kings in terms of those standard books of knowledge, and with reference to the particular situation of time and place. Such Brahmanas were not paid servants of the king, and therefore they had the strength to dictate to the king on the principles of scriptures. This system continued even up to the time of Maharaj Chandragupta, and the Brahmana Chanakya was his unpaid prime minister. Maharaj Vena did not adhere to this principle of ruling, and he disobeyed the learned Brahmanas. The broad-minded Brahmanas were not self-interested, but looked to the interest of complete welfare for all the subjects. They wanted to chastise King Vena for his misconduct, and so prayed to the Almighty Lord as well as cursed the king. Long life, obedience, good reputation, righteousness, prospects of being promoted to higher planets, and blessings of great personalities are all vanquished simply by disobedience to a great soul. One should strictly try to follow in the footsteps of great souls. Maharaj Vena became a king undoubtedly due to his past deeds of righteousness, but because he willfully neglected the great souls, he was punished by the loss of all the above-mentioned acquisitions. In the Vamana Purana, the history of Maharaja Vena and his degradation are fully described. When Maharaj Prithu heard about the hellish condition of his father, Vena, who was suffering from leprosy in the family of a Malecha, he at once brought the former king to Kurukshetra for his purification and relieved him of all sufferings. Maharaj Prithu, the incarnation of God, descended by the prayer of the Brahmanas to rectify the disorders on earth. He produced all kinds of crops, but at the same time he performed the duty of a son who delivers his father from hellish conditions. The word putra means one who delivers from hell, called put. That is a worthy son. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Maharaj Venu went astray from the path of righteousness, and the Brahmanas chastised him by the thunderbolt curse. By this, King Vena was burnt with his good deeds and opulence, and was en route to hell. The Lord, by his causeless mercy, descended as his son by the name of Prithu, delivered the condemned King Vena from hell, and exploited the earth by drawing all kinds of crops as produce. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. The Vedic system of Varnashram is a perfect way to organized society. And when it's organized properly, it's called the ideal welfare state, or the perfect welfare state. Once a leader was giving a lecture, and Prabhupada asked him to lecture. At one point he said, and Krishna consciousness is not involved with any welfare activities. And Prabhupada corrected him. He says, no. He said, Krishna consciousness is the best welfare, state. So, that correction is very important. What does it mean to have a welfare state, or a perfect welfare state? That means a society organized according to the principles of Varnashram Dharma, and in modern times it's the Daiva Varnashram Dharma, and in which all the inhabitants, whether they're Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, or Sudras, all collectively make significant spiritual progress in order to be eligible to go back to Godhead. So that's the whole purpose of the Varnashram system. Therefore, the name of religion in India is not religion. It's called Varnashram Dharma, or Sanatan Dharma, because it's the organization of the different orders of society in order to make spiritual progress and ultimately to go back to Godhead. So here we see that when there's cooperation of the Brahmanas, the Kshatriyas, the Vaishyas, and Sudras, and also the Brahmacharis, the Grihastas, the Vanaprasthas, and the Sannyasis, then everybody makes spiritual progress. There's no distinction or prejudice. The Sudra as well as the Brahmana both can go back to Godhead even in this lifetime if they follow and they cooperate. And follow means follow the dictates of the authorities. So that is what's called the constitutional position of the living entity. This is explained in more depth in the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, 6th verse, where it says, Bandhur atmanatmanastasya yenatmaivatmana jita anatmanastu satrutve vartitatmaiva satruvat. For him who has conquered the mind is the best of friends. But for one who has failed to do so, his mind will remain the greatest enemy. And the purport Prabhupada says, the purpose of practicing eightfold yoga is to control the mind in order to make it a friend in discharging the human mission. Unless the mind is controlled, the practice of yoga for show is simply a waste of time. One who cannot control his mind lives always with the greatest enemy, and thus his life and its mission are spoiled. The constitutional position of living entities is to carry out the order of the superior. That's the point. The constitutional position of the living entity is to carry out the order of the superior. As long as one's mind remains an unconquered enemy, one has to serve the dictations of lust, anger, avarice, illusion, etc. But when the mind is controlled, one voluntarily agrees to abide by the dictation of the personality of Godhead, who is situated within the heart of everyone as Paramatma. Real yoga practice entails meeting the Paramatma within the heart and then following his dictation. For one who takes the Krishna consciousness directly, perfect surrender to the dictation of the Lord follows automatically. So, how many times did he use the word dictation in this purport? Because he says that the constitutional position of a living entity is to abide or carry out the orders of the superior. And then from that point on, he says, he uses once, twice, 3 times, and 4 times the word dictation. Then the next verse, 7, jitat mana prasantasya paramatma samahita sitosna sukadukesu tata mana pramanayo. For one who has conquered the mind, the supersoul is already reached, for he has attained tranquility. To such a man, happiness and distress, heat and cold, honor and dishonor are all the same. So in the purport, he says, actually every living entity is intended to abide by the dictation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is seated in everyone's heart as Paramatma. When the mind is misled by the external illusory energy, one becomes entangled in material activities. Therefore, as soon as one's mind is controlled through one of the yoga systems, one should be considered to have already reached the destination. One has to abide by superior dictation. When one's mind is fixed on the superior nature, he has no alternative but to follow the dictation of the Supreme. The mind must admit some superior dictation and follow it. The effect of controlling the mind is that one automatically follows the dictation of the Paramatma or Supersoul, because this transcendental position is at once achieved by one who is in Krishna consciousness. The devotee of the Lord is unaffected by the dualities of material existence, namely distress and happiness, cold and heat, etc. This state of practical samadhi this state is practical samadhi or absorption in the Supreme. So now in the text 7 he uses the word dictation once, and then twice, and then 3 times, and then 4 times, and then 5 times. So 4 times in the previous verse, 5 times in this verse. So this was, of course, King Venu's problem. He voluntarily and very flippantly rejected the dictation of the Brahmanas. For the Varnashram system to function properly, the Brahmanas are the leaders of society, and they dictate to the Kshatriyas what is the right course to follow. If the Kshatriyas don't follow the dictate of the Brahmanas are, at least were in the past, so powerful they could kill the king, which is what they did to Venu. They killed him. But then they realized, oh my God, we don't have a son to take over. So they manipulated one of his thighs and produced a son. That's how powerful these brahmanas were in previous times. They produced a son, and it was an incarnation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And Prithu Maharaj appeared. So this is all miraculous things that were not uncommon in previous ages because of the purity of the brahmanas. Of course, in Kali Yuga, brahmanas have become corrupted by money and perks or advantages that they have. And this has almost completely ruined Hinduism, or Vedic Dharma more precisely. So the purity of the Brahmins was respected, and their instructions were followed. And when they were not followed, then they would eliminate that person and replace him with someone who did follow. Okay, so this following the dictation of superior authorities, actually the dictation of the Paramatma. Now, how do we know if what we're hearing, let's say, in our mind is bona fide or not? Well, this is explained in the 18th chapter, 57th verse, where it says, Cheta sa sarvakarmani maisanyasya matpara buddhi yogam upasrita matchita satatam bhava. Well, in the last part of the purport it says, one should act according to the order of Krishna. This is a very important point. that order of Krishna comes through disciplic succession from the bona fide spiritual master. Therefore, the spiritual master's order should be taken as the prime duty of life. If one gets a bona fide spiritual master and acts according to his direction, then one's perfection of life in Krishna consciousness is guaranteed. Now, of course, there are Shiksha and Diksha gurus, and they are equal in importance. So then the next verse, Mat chitta sarvadurgani mat prasada tarishyasi atachetvam ahankara nasrosyasi vinaksyasi. If you become conscious of me, Krishna says, you will pass over all the obstacles of conditioned life by my grace. If, however, you do not work in such consciousness but act through false ego, not hearing me, you will be lost. And in the purport, I won't read the whole purport, but in the last part of the purport, Prabhupada says, one should note very carefully that one who is not active in Krishna consciousness is losing himself in the material whirlpool in the ocean of birth and death. No conditioned soul actually knows what is to be done and what is not to be done. But a person who acts in Krishna consciousness is free to act because everything is prompted by Krishna from within and confirmed by the spiritual master. So this is how we know if we actually are hearing or getting instructions from the Paramatma. It has to be validated by the spiritual master. And in the Srimad Bhagavatam, 1st Canto, 7th chapter, 5th verse, Prabhupada makes it very, very clear. He says, within the super soul, within the super soul becomes spiritual master, and without, he becomes spiritual master as scriptures, saints, and initiator spiritual master. So there it is. So he says from within, it's Paramatma. From without, it's scriptures, saints, and initiator spiritual master. So now there's no doubt. How can we validate if we're hearing an instruction from Krishna as a super soul? How can we validate it? It has to be confirmed or validated further by the spiritual master and or the initiated spiritual master or saintly persons or the scriptures. Okay, so we are always, our constitutional position is to be dictated to by the Supreme Lord and also through the Parampara. So with that in place, now we see why it's a very serious thing when there's a whimsical leader. It could be a leader of a temple, it could be a leader of the movement, it could be a leader of society. A whimsical person who speculates, makes up things that are not based on scripture, and insists that they be followed. And one is not obliged to follow a person like that. So, the reason the Brahmanas are able to instruct, at least in ancient times, was because they never accepted a penny from the ruler or from anyone. They strictly had a vow of poverty, and they lived very, very simply, and therefore they could speak the truth and not be intimidated. Nowadays, because people are attached to making money, and there are many people in life today that try and control people with money. I know even devotees, some devotees in the past, they were trying to train people through money, not through Krishna consciousness, and it never works because if they can't give the money, then the people revolt. So you cannot train people with money, although businessmen try to do that all the time. But that's not the process in Krishna consciousness. We train people through shastric evidence and living. That's the way we train people. We train people by an example. You know, Apani Achari Bhakti Sikaimu. Lord Chaitanya said, first become perfect in practicing Krishna consciousness and then preach. So, if we are following strictly the regulative principles and the regulated activities of Krishna consciousness, and especially, as we've emphasized very many times, Shravanam Kirtanam, hearing and repeating, and then Smaranam, being able to remember Vedic knowledge, then we can be a member of this welfare state. We're doing good to others. Para upakar, that's our motto, do good to others. And the highest good is to teach them and train them to be Krishna conscious. And you don't control people with money, you control people with the example of purity. This is how Prabhupada established his authority, by his example of purity and humility and giving prasadam and giving Bhagavad Gita. And eventually he was able to attract a lot of people because of his purity and his generosity and his merciful nature and his affection. These are the things that influence people. They're not influenced, okay, you can say, yes, they're influenced by money to a certain degree, but it's not a loyal influence, because as soon as the money runs out, they revolt or they kill. So that's not the way to influence people. So it says here, the standard welfare codes are already there in the Manusamhita and other Vedic literatures. The learned Brahmanas would advise the king in terms of those standard books of knowledge. So one time Prabhupada was talking about so-called imposters who were pretending to be gurus. And one reporter gave a couple names to him. He said, well, what do you think of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi? And Prabhupada said, he's not standard. And they said, well, what do you think of Guru Maharaj? He said, he's not standard. And what do you think of Satchitananda? He's not standard. So every name, the reporter said, Prabhupada said, he's not standard. Now, what does that mean, it's not standard? That means it doesn't follow Shastric evidence. He doesn't follow the previous acharyas. He's made up his own sampradaya and his own authority based on his speculation. So these are people that we should never follow. They have to be standard. That is, they have to be initiated in a bona fide Vaishnava sampradaya and follow strictly the orders and dictation of their gurus. Gurus means Siksha and Diksha gurus. And always be humble. Amanitvam, adamitvam, ahimsa santirajavam, acharya pasamam satcham, staryamatva vinigraha. They have to be full of peace and humility, free from false ego, accept a bona fide spiritual master, and live strictly, and so forth. So the 20 principles of knowledge, you have to follow them. And above all, acharya pasamam socha, accepting the spiritual master, and also following the orders of the spiritual master. So this, therefore, the learned Brahmanas would advise the king in terms of those standard books of knowledge and with reference to the particular situation of time and place. Such Brahmanas were not paid servants of the king, and therefore they had the strength to dictate to the king on the principles of scriptures. So that's the whole point. If we're salaried by someone, we can't speak the truth. We can't openly speak the truth because we're afraid we could get fired. So Brahmanas would never accept one farthing or one penny or one paisa from the king. So one example is Vidura. He would go and try and advise his brother Dhritarashtra, and then he would go and beg in the street. And if no one gave him anything, he and his wife would fast. And that was the way they lived. There's different ways that they can maintain themselves. One is by begging, another is by teaching, and another is by doing rituals. and another is by going into a field after a harvest and just picking up little grains that were forgotten or not harvested. So there's different ways that they can maintain themselves, but they will not at all take a salary because then they can't speak freely. Okay, so this system continued even up to the time of Maharaj Chandragupta, and the Brahmana Chanakya was his unpaid prime minister. So one time this GBC guru, I've told this before, but it's very instructive. He he was very popular, and he had many different departments. There was the deity department, there's the Sankirtan department, there's the administrative department, there's the farming department, and there was the ladies' ashram department, the brahmachari department. And so you had everything was compartmentalized like a multinational company. And at one point he said, well, everything has to be money oriented. So if someone from the Pujari department wants to borrow a person that's in the Sankirtan department, they have to pay the leader of the Sankirtan department the amount of money that that person would normally collect on Sankirtan in order to use that person in the deity department. And vice versa, if someone in the Sankirtan department needs the services of one of the pujaris, then they have to pay the leader of the pujari department the amount of money that that person would do in terms of service that day. So it got so bad that at one point someone from, let's say, the deity department said, well, we need to borrow one of the brahmacharis going on Sankirtan to help with the offering. And the brahmachari said, well, how much are you offering? And they said, well, we only have this much money. I said, it's not enough. It ruined the whole atmosphere of Krishna consciousness. And then they realized, there was a crazy idea. So, did Prabhupada ever do that? No. But this leader thought, he's smarter than Prabhupada. So the whole thing failed, right? And so we have to be very careful what we do in Krishna consciousness. We can't speculate and make things up. And above all, Mahajana Yenikata Sapanta, Dharmasya Tattvam Nihitam Guhayam, Mahajana Yenikata Sapanta. It's like, for example, female guru issue, which is raging in ISKCON. It's a non sequitur. It's something that you don't have to be a rocket engineer to understand what the solution is. The solution is definitely not having female gurus as initiating gurus, but you can have females who are recognized as Shiksha guru. That's the solution to this problem. But because you have too many pundits in ISKCON, they love to argue back and forth and quote this Shastra or this quote from Prabhupada and this thing and that thing. And then after they make that quote, they speculate. But the principle is Dharmasya Tattvam Nihitam Guhayam Mahajana Yenikata Sapanta. The truth of Krishna consciousness is hidden within the heart of the pure devotee. Therefore, the only way to understand is to follow the example or the path chalked out by the pure devotee. So, although Prabhupada talked about women and gurus, he never appointed any woman as a guru. He never appointed any woman as a leader. So, Dharmasya Tattvam Nihitam Guhayam. The truth is hidden within the heart of pure devotee, and the only way we can understand is by his example, what he actually did in his lifetime. And not only that, neither Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, neither Gaura Kishore Babaji, neither Bhakti Vinod Thakur, neither the Goswamis, none of them made a woman a leader or especially a initiating guru. So then how can we do that today? You see? Now, that's only one example. There are other examples. Forget about the female guru issue. There are many other examples. We cannot do anything or institute anything that Prabhupada did not do. Because he was instructing us by his panth, the path that he traversed, or the example that he gave. So there is a solution. Yeah, they can become Siksha gurus. And there is a solution to many other issues in ISKCON. But it has to be on this principle. Dharma Tatvan Nihitan Guhayam Mahajana Yenikata Sapanta. If we use any other principle, like reason and logic, or some kind of science, or this or that, it's going to be wrong. Guaranteed. Okay, so then it says here, long life, obedience, and reputation, good reputation, righteousness, prospects of being promoted to higher planets, and blessings of great personalities are all vanquished, meaning defeated, simply by disobedience to a great soul. Now that is the most significant statement right there, because what do we learn in Krishna consciousness? Right from the beginning, it's to accept the authority of bona fide devotees or teachers. And when we revolt against it, or we adamantly or obstinately refuse to follow bona fide instruction, we lose all the good qualities that we evolved over time in Krishna consciousness. They're almost immediately erased. So it's a serious thing to ignore the direct instructions of a pure devotee. And we've seen that whenever there was some deviation in the past, there was calamity, and there was a tremendous, let's say, repercussions. So, therefore, Prabhupada says, one should strictly try to follow in the footsteps of great souls. That is Mahajana Yenikata Sapanta. That is an alternate translation of that verse right there. One should strictly try to follow in the footsteps of great souls. Maharaj Vena became a king undoubtedly due to his past deeds of righteousness, but because he willfully neglected the great souls, he was punished by the loss of all the above-mentioned acquisitions. In the Vamana Purana, the history of Maharaj Vena and his degradation are fully described. When Maharaj Prithu heard about the hellish condition of his father, Vena, who was suffering from leprosy in the family of a Malecha. In other words, Maharaj Prithu understood, probably from, I'm not sure exactly how he understood it, maybe he had a revelation, or maybe it was from the Brahmanas, but his father took birth as the son of a Malecha, and he was suffering from leprosy in his next life as a result of his disobedience to the Brahmanas. So what does Prithu do? He is a proper son. He's putra. He saves his father from that dire situation of being a leper in the family of a low-class person, or a family of malechas, meat-eaters. And he elevated his father by his purity. And the way you do that is through the Shraddha ceremony, by offering Mahaprasadam to one's ancestors. And that can purify them if they're in a very bad situation, and they can come back at least to the human form of life. So he produced all kinds of, Prithu, Venu, who was suffering from leprosy in the family of Malecha, he had once brought the former king, or Venu, to Kurukshetra for his purification and relieved him of all sufferings. This is amazing, right? He finds his father, who's a leper in a family of meat eaters and brings them to Kurukshetra and purifies them. See? So these are possible things if we follow Krishna consciousness. And they're impossible if we don't follow. Okay, so are there any questions?
Thank you very much. Very enlightening class. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Krishna. Krishna consciousness is wonderful. Every day we have class. We haven't stopped. Every day we've had class for like 3 years, on going verse by verse in Bhagavatam. You know, it's all nectar. Every day we learn something new. Prabhupada's purports are unparalleled in this modern world, and we're very fortunate. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hari Bol, Hari Bol.